picture this. It's February of 2003. You are unpacking boxes in this incredibly beautiful 18th century Maryland farmhouse that you just bought for your family.
Oh, wow. That sounds like an absolute dream.
Right. It's called Worth's Folly. And you've just bought out your brothers to take full control of your marketing company, which is called Benchworks.
So everything is looking up. You're completely in charge now.
Exactly. You make your first mortgage payment, you walk down the country lane to check your brand new mailbox, and inside is a single letter.
Oh, no. I feel like I know where this is going.
Yeah. It's from your biggest client, the pharmaceutical giant Wyeth. They represent 50% of your revenue. And the letter just says they are terminating your contract.
Wait, 50%?
50% effective immediately. They had some vendor consolidation program, so no appeals, you're just cut off.
I mean, that is the ultimate entrepreneurial nightmare, right? The kind of moment where you're staying up late after the family goes to sleep, just, sipping whiskey and staring at a spreadsheet, trying to figure out how to keep a roof over your head.
And how to keep your employees from losing their livelihoods. But Fat L. Bench Sr. actually lived that exact nightmare. We're pulling this story directly from his book, Noble Work, which was published in 2026.
And the crazy thing is, he didn't just survive that 2003 crisis. He completely modeled this terrifying lifeboat scenario where he cut costs to the absolute bone.
Right. And then he pivoted to this highly aggressive, what he calls return fire outbound sales strategy.
Yeah, and he grew Benchworks all the way to a high 8-figure exit in May of 2024.
Which is just incredible. So for anyone listening who wants to build, scale, or, just understand what makes a resilient organization, this deep dive is a total masterclass.
It really is. We are taking a shortcut past all the flashy growth hacks and social media noise to look at the unglamorous stuff.
The real stuff.
Exactly. The two fundamental forces that actually dictate whether a business survives: governance and cash flow.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we're going to start with the invisible bedrock, which is governance.
Yeah, because before you can even think about managing your cash, you have to ensure you aren't actively digging your own grave through bad decision-making.
Exactly. And Bench shares this crazy story about a $10 million a year pharma contract that perfectly illustrates the true cost of cutting corners.
Right. So Benchworks was competing for this massive master services agreement, and it basically became this fierce race to the bottom.
Yeah, you get into these corporate procurement portals, and everyone is just aggressively underbidding each other. Bench watched the target gross margins drop lower and lower and lower.
And so Benchworks actually bowed out. They finished in second place because Bench realized the executional risk was just way too high once the margins dropped below 25%.
I mean, it makes sense. If you are operating on a 10% margin in a massive pharmaceutical rollout, like a single unforeseen delay or a staffing issue just completely wipes out your profit.
Right. You literally end up paying for the privilege of doing the work.
So the company that actually won the bid, they decided to take that incredibly thin margin.
And what happened?
Well, about a year later, a pharmaceutical client audited them. Giant corporations do this routinely, to ensure vendors are holding up their end of the master services agreement.
Sure.
And the client discovered the winning bidder had not actually lived up to their margin commitments. They were either intentionally deceiving the client just to survive, or they were purely desperate because they couldn't deliver the work profitably.
Wow. And the fallout from that must have been massive.
Oh, it was catastrophic. The contract was terminated, the company filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and over 100 people lost their jobs.
Over 100 people. See, what's fascinating here is that governance isn't just corporate red tape. It's not just a dusty binder on a shelf. It is the structural bedrock that prevents fatal shortcuts.
Right.
If your business fails because of commercial headwinds, like losing a huge client to a vendor consolidation like Bench did, that is an acceptable failure. You survive to fight another day, and people will still work with you.
But failing due to ethical lapses or deception, that completely destroys your reputation.
And your reputation outlives your financial results.
I hear that, I do. But let me push back a little here. For a lot of entrepreneurs listening, I bet governance feels like flossing.
Like flossing.
Yeah, like everyone knows they should do it, but when you're fighting fires just to make payroll, it's the very first thing that gets dropped. It feels like a luxury for big established corporations with compliance departments, not really a survival tool for a scrappy startup.
That's a fair point, but I'd argue governance is actually a competitive advantage, especially when you're small. It isn't a luxury, it's a shield.
How so?
Because over time, a reputation for operating ethically, like paying your vendors consistently, being honest about delays, operating with transparency, that earns you grace.
Oh, like grace from your bank.
Exactly. It earns you grace from lenders when you have a bad quarter. It builds deep trust with clients who know you won't cut corners, and that trust literally buys you time during a crisis.
Yeah. Okay, I see that. You mentioned that trust builds a noble culture over time. But, culture isn't truly tested when things go wrong. Yeah. It's actually tested when a mistake works entirely in your favor.
Well, this is the perfect segue. You're talking about the mysterious $95,000 loan.
Yes. Bench experienced this exactly. So Benchworks had acquired a smaller, cash-constrained company. And while integrating their books, they found a $95,000 loan from a local Maryland Department of Economic Development.
Right, and the acquired company hadn't been making payments, and the county just hadn't been asking for them.
So Benchworks called the county to figure out how to pay it off, and the county had absolutely no record of the loan existing.
None at all.
None. Likely due to, employee turnover or bad record keeping, but the debt had just vanished from the government's radar.
Which naturally sparked months of internal debate at Benchworks. Because from a purely mathematical standpoint, you just write off as a liability, recognize the windfall, and move on, right?
Let me put on the skeptic's hat for a second here. Isn't going out of your way to pay a $95,000 debt that the county literally lost track of kind of like reminding the teacher she forgot to assign weekend homework?
It totally is.
Like you are actively penalizing yourself for someone else's incompetence.
It definitely feels that way on the surface.
Yeah.
But Bench realized something crucial about human behavior within an organization. If leadership rationalizes wiping out a massive debt simply because they can get away with it, they chip away at the foundational culture.
Yeah, it sets a dangerous precedent.
Think about how many marketing agencies use cost-plus contracts, where the client pays for the raw materials plus a fixed percentage for profit.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going. If you show your employees that it's okay to quietly ignore a state debt, what stops those same employees from quietly inflating the expenses on a cost-plus contract tomorrow?
Exactly the risk Bench saw. Character is doing the right thing when no one is looking. So Bench proactively contacted the Maryland comptroller, escalated the issue, and miraculously, the state also couldn't find the records.
So what did they do?
They formally converted that original debt into a grant. The financial outcome was great, but the message it sent to the employees was the real asset. It proved the leadership team actually meant what they said.
And Bench translates this philosophy into some highly practical, everyday principles for growing companies. He outlined 7 core ideas, but they really boil down to setting the tone from the top and managing risk.
Right, like he insists leadership must oversee competent and ethical operations.
And actively stick to standard accounting principles. Plus, ensuring fair and impartial compensation to kill any conflicts of interest.
And you have to extend that fairness to every stakeholder, from your vendors to the local community. And you have to enact this mechanically.
Give me an example of what you mean by mechanically.
Well, take advisory boards. Many growing businesses have an advisory board, but they just offer advice. They have zero legal liability if the company goes under.
Right, as opposed to a fiduciary board, which actually has legal obligations to the shareholders.
Exactly. So Bench argues you should treat your advisory board like a fiduciary board. Make your advisors do 2-year paid terms so they're genuinely invested.
Prep for those meetings like you are a publicly traded company.
Yes, it forces a level of rigor on your internal team. He also really stresses hiring a great CPA and understanding exactly what kind of documents your bank wants to see.
Which is so important because a lot of people don't know there are different tiers of financial statements.
It's a critical distinction. A reviewed financial statement is basically your CPA just double-checking your math to make sure things look plausible.
Okay.
But an audited statement is entirely different. The CPA legally verifies that the money actually exists. They check bank balances. They contact clients.
Wow, so it's way more intense.
Much more. And a quality of earnings report dives even deeper to show what the true operational cash flow is, completely stripping out one-time windfalls or unusual expenses. You really have to know which one you need.
And above all, Bench emphasizes, never ever delay your monthly reporting.
Yeah. Trying to run a business without timely financial reporting is literally like flying a plane through the Grand Canyon at night.
That's a terrifying image.
Well, you might survive for a little while by pure luck, but eventually you're going to hit a canyon wall you never saw coming.
But Paying off a forgotten loan and getting your accounting in order is just one side of the ledger. You can have the most ethical, rigorously governed company on earth, but if you run out of cash, the mission is over.
It's game over.
So we have to talk about what Bench calls the flying monkey era.
Ah, yes, the 2008 financial crisis.
But before we get to 2008, we need to establish the terrifying reality of commercial borrowing for a small or mid-sized business.
This is something a lot of folks don't realize.
Right, because when a large corporation borrows money, the corporation itself is usually liable. But when a founder borrows working capital, they usually have to sign a personal guarantee.
Which means you are pledging your own personal assets.
Including your family home as collateral.
The stakes could not be higher. You are literally putting your children's childhood home on the line just to make payroll. So 2008 hits. Total chaos in the markets.
Absolute chaos.
Benchworks is in the process of switching banks to Wilmington Trust, and Bench gets a call from his new banker asking him to fill out a borrowing-based certificate for his multi-million-dollar credit line.
And Bench admits in the book he had absolutely no idea what that was.
Right. He just assumed that a credit line was static. Like, if he had a $2 million line and he had only drawn $1 million, he was fine.
But he didn't understand the complex formula behind asset-based lending.
No, because asset-based lending is not a static pool of money. The bank lends you money based on the changing value of your eligible assets, specifically your current accounts receivable and your inventory.
So they're looking at your invoices.
Exactly. The bank looks at your invoices every month and calculates how much they will let you borrow.
Wait, so if asset-based lending relies on the changing value of your receivables, if your clients suddenly stop paying you because the economy crashes, your bank simultaneously cuts off your credit line.
Yes.
You get squeezed from both sides at the exact same moment.
That is the fatal trap of asset-based lending during a recession. When Bench finally filled out the certificate, he realized they were underwater by hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh my God.
Their assets had shrunk, meaning their borrowing limit had plummeted below the amount they had already spent.
So the bank immediately put them in workout mode, which is essentially bank purgatory. The bank takes total control and refuses to cover their payroll or payables until the ratio is fixed.
Yeah.
I have to say, reading that a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company didn't know how his own credit line worked, that is terrifying. It's like driving a sports car at 150 miles per hour and suddenly realizing you have absolutely no idea how the brakes function.
That's a great analogy, and Bench actually owns up to that exact sentiment. He says ignorance at that level is inexcusable for a founder. Fortunately, he caught an unbelievable break.
He did. He was at a restaurant across the street from his office and bumped into a sailing buddy of his who just happened to be an heir to a substantial family fortune.
Talk about right place, right time.
Honestly. Bench pitched him on the spot, laid out the dire situation, and secured a life-saving angel investment.
An investment that netted that buddy a 10x return, by the way.
Wow, really?
Yeah. But Bench swore he would never lose sight of cash flow again. So he outlines 7 absolute non-negotiables for managing cash, and they are incredibly practical.
Let's hear them.
So he starts with forecasting and collections. You have to build conservative, regular forecasts because timelines always shift. And you have to tighten up your accounts receivable. You have to literally ask clients for the money you are owed and not let invoices age.
Which seems basic, but so many people are afraid to ask for the check.
Exactly. He also targets operational bloat. Keep your inventory just in time because excess inventory sitting on a shelf is just trapped cash.
Makes sense.
Crucially, he says you have to manage your debt by building a 3 to 6 month working capital reserve. He calls it a fortress balance sheet, kind of like a mini Berkshire Hathaway. It protects you from the exact squeeze we just talked about.
He also focuses on revenue quality. He says to increase your efficiency by upselling existing customers because it is so much cheaper than chasing new ones.
Right, and do not be afraid to exit low-margin, time-draining business. Price-driven clients will squeeze your margins, they'll distract your team, and they will erode your culture.
And finally, mandate cross-department communication. Finance, sales, and operations must talk to each other so the sales team isn't out there selling something operations can't profitably deliver.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, knowing how to protect your cash is half the battle. Knowing where to get it is the other. Bench outlines the real-world funding options.
Like friends and family.
Yeah, friends and family is common, but it carries heavy emotional risk. Angel investors and family offices, like his sailing buddy, can be lifesavers. Venture debt is an option, usually for high-growth tech firms.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Bench discusses private equity, but he attaches a massive warning label to it.
He really does.
Because private equity firms usually operate on a rigid 3 to 7 year exit timeline.
Right. They need to return money to their own investors within that specific window. So if your long-term vision requires a 10-year build, their ticking clock is going to force you into short-term, highly aggressive financial targets.
Which means they might force you to cut employee benefits or squeeze your vendors.
Exactly. It creates a massive risk of a culture clash that can just break your company from the inside out.
He also mentions crowdfunding, which is accessible but tricky for B2B companies, and bootstrapping, which means funding it entirely yourself from your own profits.
Bootstrapping is slower, but you retain total control and you avoid the ticking clock of debt entirely.
Having established the mechanics of cash flow, we see how Bench put this all together during a totally different kind of crisis. The 2020 pandemic.
Right. This was the ultimate test.
A major client of Benchworks paused their engagement. Revenue plummeted overnight, and this hit right at the beginning of the Great Resignation, where employees were leaving companies in droves.
Cash became incredibly tight once again.
But this is where that invisible bedrock of governance saved them. The culture held. Bench communicated completely transparently with the team about the financials.
Because he had spent years proving he wouldn't cut corners, the employees actually trusted him.
Amazingly, boomerang employees, people who had left Benchworks for other agencies years prior, actually came back during the crisis.
Why do people come back to a struggling company during a pandemic? Because toxic cultures burn people out. They realized the ethical foundation at Benchworks was actually worth saving.
Bench leaned on 2 quotes to keep the team focused. One from FDR. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear.
I love that. And a sailing motto. The best bilge pump in the world is a scared man with a bucket.
It's so true. But grit alone doesn't pay the bills. Bench enacted highly tactical steps to protect cash.
Right, like run credit checks on clients before you start the work. Demand upfront deposits.
He also says to offer a 1% discount if a client pays within 10 days to accelerate cash coming in.
And most importantly, stand firm against massive corporate clients who try to steamroll your payment terms and force you to wait 90 days to get paid.
Inside the house, you need strict internal controls. Use 2-party authorization for all payables. This simply means 2 different people have to sign off before money leaves the company, which completely eliminates the risk of internal fraud.
And if you have the buying power, negotiate 60 to 90-day payment terms with your own vendors.
But when times are really tight, keep making small, consistent payments to those vendors to build goodwill instead of just going dark.
But your most crucial relationship is with the bank. As Bench writes, banks hate surprises. You have to understand your loan covenants.
The strict promises you make to the bank to keep your loan in good standing.
Exactly. This means timely tax payments, providing annual bank audits, and carrying specific insurance. Banks care deeply about business interruption insurance.
Because if your warehouse burns down, they want to know a policy will replace your lost income so you can still pay your loan.
Right. You also must know your ratios, because the bank is always watching them. Let's explain the quick ratio.
Okay, the quick ratio. It's your cash plus accounts receivable divided by your current liabilities. The goal is to always be 1-to-1 or higher.
And the intuition behind the quick ratio is simple. If every single one of your short-term creditors knocked on your door today demanding their money, do you have exactly enough liquid assets to pay them all off and still have $1 left?
If the answer is no, your bank starts to panic.
You also need to keep your debt-to-equity ratio below 2-to-1, meaning you don't have twice as much debt as you do actual value in the company.
So, dealing with banks during a crisis requires a very specific mindset. Hiding a bad quarter from the bank is a fatal error. They aren't an adversary you bluff at a poker table. They're more like a strict landlord.
I like that.
You don't hide the broken window. You call them with a detailed plan to fix it before they show up for their inspection.
Precisely. Because if you panic and hide the reality, you limit your options until it is just too late. Selling equity in a panic is the absolute most expensive way to raise money.
You will have to accept terrible terms.
It might save your business today, but it will cost you millions of dollars at the ultimate exit when passive investors reap the rewards of all the sweat and stress you put into saving the company.
So what does this all mean? If you take anything away from this deep dive into Thad Bench's playbook, it's that building a noble, profitable business is not about going viral. It isn't about finding a hack.
It's about discipline.
It is about that invisible bedrock of governance. It is about actively doing the right thing when no one is looking, like tracking down the state controller to pay a forgotten $95,000 debt because you know your team is watching.
Yeah.
And it is about relentlessly mathematically managing the reality of your cash flow so you never have to sign away your company in a blind panic.
This raises an important question, though. If we look ahead to the future business landscape, a landscape that is increasingly obsessed with artificial intelligence, algorithms, and automating every possible operational task, we really have to recognize that human character cannot be coded.
That's a great point.
Could a company's strict adherence to ethical governance and a highly trusted, noble culture become the ultimate unautomatable premium?
Oh, wow.
In a world where the actual work is commoditized by AI, could deep human trust become the one thing customers are actually willing to pay top dollar for?
That is a fascinating thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. If you're building your own business right now, or leading a team, we highly encourage you to take a hard look at your own processes, your invoices, and your organizational culture with fresh eyes. Are you treating governance as a luxury or a shield? Think back to that pastoral farm in Maryland and ask yourself, is your foundation strong enough to weather the letter in the mailbox?